Hi friends, it's Miracle, and now we are less than a week away from the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction this year is announced. So today I want to talk about my thoughts on the books that are shortlisted. I have just finished reading all the books that I can find on the shortlist yesterday, and I have thoughts and also my hopes for the winner. I said that I read all the books that I could find because I could not get access to Black Butterflies. I don't think that book is published in the States yet, and I cannot get it online either because of my IP is restricting me from purchasing an e-copy or even the audiobook, I think. So today I will just talk about my predictions based on the other 5 books. With that being said, the shortlist this year feels weird. Compared to some previous years where I have multiple books that I'm rooting for, this year I kind of only have one book and I also have one DNF. So without further ado, let's talk about the books. I will talk about them from my least favorite, aka the DNF, to my most favorite. So first of all, the DNF. It is Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This book sounds promising. It is a historical fiction set in Ireland during the time period called the Trouble, and it's centered around a young woman called Priscilla who works at a school as a teacher by day, and at night she works in her family bar. And one day she met this guy called Michael, and her world started to shift it. Before I start reading this book, I was a little bit worried because the Trouble is not a time period that I am familiar with. So naturally, I'm worried that my lack of information would impact the reading. If you are like me, worry not, because this book is not a historical fiction that dealing heavily with the historical side, so the Trouble actually plays a tiny part in the background of the story, which actually doesn't matter. This is essentially a historical romance between Ursula and Michael, and the romance is just so cringy, but we will get back to it later. I have a bigger problem with this book. What drove me away the most from this story is actually the countless, useless, redundant details of writing. Like every minor action of the characters are written down, no matter if they are contributing to the story or not. Even sometimes even not the characters, like random people's activities was jogged down as well. For example, there's one scene that talks about the character got downstairs and walked out of the bar. And you can just only tell me that and I will understand that, oh, she walked outside the bar. You don't need to tell me what drinks the random people ABC on the side were drinking. Like, it doesn't really matter. They were just happened to sit there in the bar. Like, the bar has customers. Like, we understand. Like, why does it matter that what they are drinking and what their drinks look like? Like, And now let's talk about the romance. When we're talking about the romance in this book, we're talking about a young woman who's getting involved with a married man who's twice her age. This is not even a spoiler, it was written on the blurb, and the wife of the married man was mentioned a couple times in the story and was talked down a lot to justify the story and this affair. But the writing just didn't make it believable. The man Michael just like have so many flaws, and I just couldn't stand behind this romance or affair. Every time there's a steamy scene of them getting together, I just feel gross, for lack of a better word, and I was full of goosebumps in a bad way. This is a fairly short book, but I still decided to DNF it halfway because life is too short. I just couldn't see myself reading it, like spend more time with this book. And I don't understand why people loved it, why it made its way to the shortlist. And I actually complained about it on Instagram, and I got so many messages of people saying that they didn't enjoy it either. So that makes me feel better, and I also know the ending of the story thanks to you guys, and it was awful. But with that being said, that was just my opinion. If you happen to love this book, please tell me why in the comment section down below. I will be thrilled to learn from you. I really want to understand why this book. Why? And now let's move on. The next book I have here is Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. This is a book that I read the first for the shortlist for women's press for fiction, and initially I thought this will be the most disappointed book. But Trespasses just exceeds the expectation, and this book became more interesting after I read that one. So for this book, this is another historical fiction. It says in the 1980s in the Jamaican community in London. By the way, it feels so surreal to say that 1980s is a historical fiction time period, but it is somehow the fact that we need to accept. This book centered around a young woman called Yamnia who was raised up by her distant father after her mom disappeared, and she has such a vibrant life. She lives for the weekend, going out with friends, dancing and clubbing and enjoying her life. And one day she met a man called Moose, and this encounter changed her life. And as I was saying that, I just feel like it sounds a lot like the last book, but it is different because she suddenly finds out that she is in the center of a political scandal, and that also made her interested in finding out who she really was. The book deals a lot with melody, and you can even tell that from the writing, and it portrays the immigrant community's passion for music, culture, politics so vividly and powerfully, and I loved that aspect of this book. However, my problem with this book is that my cat is like running like crazy. Anyhow, my problem of this book is I want more of the political dynamic of this book instead of the other thing that this book was writing about. The power plays was fascinating. The different roles that people played in their community was so captivating. Sometimes things get so intense and it was so nerve-wracking, and I kept wanting more and more. However, the book didn't deliver. It kind of laid out all the elements on the ground and moved on. So I was very unsatisfying with this book on that aspect. So I feel like it's such a shame because this book has so much potential, but I also feel like maybe that's also why this book didn't develop into the political dynamic too deeply, because it tries to do so much. It tries to tell so many things in one story that it doesn't really have the room for each one of the elements to develop further. So yeah, that was why it's the second least favorite of mine, but I still enjoyed it a bit, and I just feel like if it explored the political side a lot more, I will love this book more. Following, I have two books that I feel kind of similarly, however they are also very different, so I have the most difficult time to compare them. In the end, I ranked the book that I have more tangled thoughts or I have more complicated feelings a little bit higher, and that leaves the third place to Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. However, that does not mean this book is worse or is not good. Actually, on the contrary, I like it quite a lot. I just feel like it is a very good book. It's a very steady kind of good, so it makes it a little bit less intriguing compared to the next book. This is a modern adaptation of the book David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, which Charles Dickens wrote about a character called David Copperfield who survived his devastating childhood and institutional poverty. And in this book, Kingsolver moved the settings from 1850s London to the contemporary American South, but the premise stays the same. This is a coming-of-age story talking about a boy called Demon Copperhead. Demon was born to a teenaged mother, single mother in a trailer, and without a penny to their name, Demon needs to learn how to take care of himself and the people around him very early on. This book paints such a compelling picture of the community in the rural area, and especially for people like Demon who needs to fight for their survival with every fiber in their bodies. Demon went through irresponsible guardian, foster care, derelict schools, bullying, child labor, and addiction, and a lot more. At some point, I was like, this is just a series of unfortunate events, and it was so hard to read and also heartbreaking. at the same time, because everything is so vividly captured, I was very much emotionally invested in Demon. I admired him as a main character a lot, and it just shows how much resilience the characters and also the communities has. The writing was also really good, and sometimes I found myself holding breath for very intense scenes and activities, but there were times I feel like the events are a little bit dragging too long, and I was afraid the story will become flat. However, the book was able to pick it up very quickly, so that didn't happen. If you like a coming-of-age historical fiction, I do recommend this one. Now let's talk about the books that are on my second place, and this is also a book that give me very fluctuated feelings, and I have so much complicated thoughts about it, and it is Pod by Laline Paull. This book is experimental. It was set in an ocean, and all the main characters are marine lives. For example, one of the main characters is called Ia, who is a spinner dolphin. Ia feels like an outsider growing up, and she was never fitting in with her peers, and now she's at the age of master the art of spinning because they are spinner dolphins, but she also suffers from a kind of deafness that prevent her to do so. One day she got blamed for an accident and she just ran out of her tribe without knowing what dangers laying ahead of her. Like I said, my feeling towards this book changes a lot, because at first I was like, what is this? Especially when the word people is used to describe other marine lives, because I started to even question myself, like, are people involved in this scene? Like, they are human involved in this book at some point, but not in that exact scene. So the people was really describing other marine lives, and I struggled with this because I don't like how it humanized the animals, but also not completely. My preference, if you want to humanize animals, just do it completely, like Animal Farm. And also I heard Glory did it really well, which is a book that I really want to read. But this book kind of does it halfway. So sometimes you feel like the marine lives are humanized, but sometimes they're not completely. So when the book is describing their nature instincts, things can get a bit weird, especially when it's writing about the mating instincts. So that's why my feelings of this book fluctuated a lot, because I don't know which angle I should look at the animals from. So my thought actually spins around a lot, which is a word that appears a lot in this book. But in the end, I was just like, oh my god, I'm so tired of this, just let it go, and I will just go with the flow. That is when things became magical and I was able to fully enjoy the book. For example, some fish groups or marine life groups are kind of patriarchy. If you are seeing them from the animal side, you'll know that it's all their nature living mechanism. If you suddenly humanize them, you will see all the modern problems in there. It became a microcosm of the society, and it is quite interesting that way. Another question to think about is why Ia is not accepted by her group. It's just because she's a little bit different, and also she suffers from all the judgments being a female in her tribe, and the troubles are just all so relatable. So things like that kept me jumping from side to side of understanding them, and in the end it became a fantastic experience. And from the setting side, I also love how humans are not playing a major role at front, but we can see the devastating thing that people are doing to the ocean, which affected the life of the fish, the other marine lives in the ocean, and it was just kind of a sad shadow overcast the whole story. I also like some of the side characters. They are very interesting and different, and they all have their own goals to life, and sometimes to achieve that goals, they're doing some weird things, which is just so funny. So I ended up really enjoying this book, and I was so happy that I was reading it on an e-reader, so I can look up words very easily, because there are so many words that associated with marine life that I don't know. For all of the reasons above, it beats Demon Copperhead and became my second favorite in this pile of books. So now, if you know all the books that are on the shortlist, you already know which one is my favorite, and it is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. And this book is actually a really good surprise to me because a couple of years ago, Maggie O'Farrell wrote Hamlet, which is the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction that year, but also my most disappointed book of that same year because I just couldn't do with that book. I couldn't connect with it. I didn't like the pacing. I didn't like the writing. It was just not for me. So this year, when I saw another of her books on the shortlist, I was a little bit nervous because I didn't know if I will like this book or if I will suffer when reading it. But as you know, it surprised me in the best way. This is another historical fiction. We got almost all historical fiction on this shortlist. It's talking about a girl called Lucrezia who lived in 1550s in Italy, and she is very lively. She's a very curious girl, and she dreams to be a painter. However, her childhood was cut short because one of her bigger sister died when she was about to marry a man, and her fiance decided to take Lucrezia as wife instead. So Lucrezia's unexpected marriage transformed her from a happy girl with a dream to a woman who is expected to be a mother in any minute. This book was captivating. It follows two timelines. One is the timeline in the past, talking about Lucrezia's childhood, all the way leads up to her marriage. Another timeline starts with 1 year after the marriage, and there are the huge plot gap in between that kept you wondering, oh, what happened in between of the timelines? How did one timeline in the past leads to the timeline in the present, and it just doesn't match up. So you kept your curiosity until the last minute or the last 50 pages. Clearly, I'm not a historian, nor am I a expert in that historical period in Italy, but despite my lack of knowledge about that historical period, I was captivated by the historical remark that presented in this book. The writing was transportive. I was immersed in the atmosphere, especially when things get a little bit intense. I loved that. Another thing that I loved is Lucrezia is a painter, so the way she looked at the world from her painter's eyes is just so delightful to look at, and I just liked every detail about the paintings in this book that brought up either painted by Lucrezia or other people. They're just so fantastic to read. So overall, I adore this book, and I'm so happy it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I'm able to give Maggie O'Farrell a second chance. Otherwise, I don't know if I would pick up this book based on my experience with Hamlet. So needless to say, I'm rooting for The Marriage Portrait this year. However, I can also see if Demon Copperhead wins the Women's Prize for Fiction, because that book is just such a steady, good, epic coming-of-age story. I do also like Pod, but I don't think a lot of people will connect with it, especially as so experimental, and my own feelings fluctuated so much, and I was able to magically connect with the book, but I can see why some people don't like it. Frankly, I'll be happy if any of the 3 books win this year, or like other books, just not this one. I cannot. So that is my thoughts on the books that I was able to read on the shortlist of Women's Prize for Fiction. Please let me know any of your thoughts about those books. Have you read any of them? Are you reading for the shortlist for Women's Prize for Fiction this year? And what are your thoughts about the books? And what did you read recently? Let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to thumbs up to this video if you liked it. I wish you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!